Okay, the pointer doesn't work, but we'll go ahead. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my session this evening, this afternoon. I'm going to talk about something that piques my interest. One of my interests is history and looking back at history, and particularly being Irish, looking back at Irish history. And just to introduce who I am before we go into it, my name is Brian Honan. I run BH Consulting. We're an independent security consulting firm based out of Dublin. We also set up and run IRISCERT, which is Ireland's first computer emergency response team. So we're completely voluntary, and we provide services to the Irish business community on incident response and coordination. I'm a special advisor to Europol on internet security, so I work with them, with the Europol European Cybercrime Centre, and to give them advice on where things should be happening in regards to fighting cybercrime. I lecture in University College Dublin on a Master's in Information Security, and I also provide advice to ENISA, the European Network Information Security Agency, on resilience, certs, and cloud computing. And I'm regularly quoted in various newspaper articles, etc. So there's my dad. I hadn't planned to use my laptop this evening, but hopefully nothing else will pop up. So 2016, it's an interesting year because maybe to a lot of you who are not Irish, 2016 probably doesn't mean a whole lot. Like 100 years ago, what happened? 100 years ago in Ireland, we had what was called the Irish Rising. It was where a bunch of Irish rebels launched an attack over the Easter weekend against the German post office in Dublin and a few other locations in a bid to gain Irish freedom from British rule. So it's a big significant date in Irish history. It was the start of our independence, our fight for independence from England. It didn't succeed. It lasted for about a week, and they ended up surrendering after half of Dublin was destroyed in the fighting. And there's the original proclamation from Ireland. That's our base of our constitution there, which was in 1916, and that's the opening lines from it. And these gentlemen here are the rebel leaders from that rising. But also, 1916 was a significant year from World War I. So it was the Battle of the Somme, one of the majors and bloodiest battles ever in World War I. Now, that also has a significant impact on Irish history because, on one hand, in 1912, 1914, Ireland was looking to devolve and break away from the United Kingdom. But you had a bunch of people who decided, stay on this side, we're Irish, we fight for our own freedom, or we go on this side and we devolve through Parliament, through Home Rule. World War I came along, and then you had both sides. So you had people on the rebel side in Ireland staying at home to fight against the British, but you had actually Irish soldiers and Irish men going over and join the British Army and fighting in World War I, with the view that at the end of the war, as a reward, we would get our freedom from the UK. So you can see here are some of the recruitment posters that were looking for Irish people to go over. I think this one's quite significant. Trust me, gentlemen in the audience, there's nothing more scary than a pissed off Irish woman. So if she's telling you, you're going over there to fight, you go. Because trust me, it's a lot less hassle than staying and defending yourself. So an interesting documentary came on BBC when during the summer called Somme 1916 from Both Sides of the Wire. So I suppose particularly being Irish and being so close to the UK, our historic view of World War I would be heavily influenced by UK history and UK research and everything. So I didn't really know a whole lot about the German side in the World War I, and particularly in the Battle of the Somme. And it was very interesting. This gentleman here, who is Peter Barton, he is the man who made that particular documentary. It looked at both sides of the conflict, and I looked at why did the Battle of the Somme, which was originally planned by the British generals and the British High Command to only last a few days. It was going to be a major attack, break German lines, and end the war much earlier than it was going to go on for. But he looked at both sides. And historically, the Battle of the Somme has been looked at as a ongoing grind of Allied forces against the German forces, and that very much it was British superiority that won the battle in the end. But once enough, that isn't the message I got from this documentary. And you can see the Battle of the Somme started July 1916, 1st of July 1916, here's the original line, and 19th November, that's how far the British and Allied forces gained land in the battle. It was only a few kilometers. And in that, quite a number of people died. And this is one of our CISOs. So General Haig, he was the commander-in-chief of the British side. And the other CISO, because I think these are lessons we can learn for modern CISOs, is Crown Prince Ruprecht. And both of them had different styles in how they managed their officers and ultimately their campaigns, which I think we can learn from, and we'll go into in more detail later as we go along. Interestingly, Allied forces outnumbered the German forces 8-1. Yet the German forces were still able to hold them back. And I think even that for us as defenders of our own networks, our own systems, we're heavily outnumbered. We have many talks today about the attackers and people out there who are trying to break into our systems. We have to defend against them. We have to defend against the people who've got the budgets, who won't give us the money to invest in what we need to do. And we have to defend against our own users as well. So, you know, we're kind of outnumbered in many different fronts. At the end of the Somme, over 1 million soldiers died on both sides. So quite a significant, heavy casualties. Thankfully, we don't have any such casualties in cybersecurity just yet, but who knows. And this is how I used to think of trench warfare or the warfare in World War I. It was these dirty trenches, you had the soldiers stuck in each one. This is from the English side. German trenches here, you can see very similar, just deep holes in the ground, and you just stayed in there and just shot across each other, and then you ran across the land in between and hoped to get the other side without getting killed. Not a very intelligent way to fight a war, in my opinion, but then again, that's probably why I work in cybersecurity, not in military. And yet again, another picture of German troops. So after watching this series of documentaries, there's some key lessons that I took out of it that I think we can apply to today's modern CISO. One important thing is threat intel and information sharing. And the picture of the pigeon here is to show that before the Allied forces launched their attack, the Germans intercepted a lot of the communications that the British were having, and therefore knew in advance what the British forces' plans were. As a result, they were able to better prepare their defenses and know where the troops were coming. They were able to have ambushes, etc., to tackle the British forces. So the Germans also had very good planning and preparation. They made sure that all their officers knew what was happening, knew what was going on. There was they reacted to the intel and the information that they got, and they adjusted their plans accordingly. The British forces didn't. One of the key things that was noted, that the plan had been that the German defenses had 3 lines, and that the British were going to bombard the first 2 lines, so therefore the troops only had to advance and fight the 3rd lines. But because they had the Germans had planned and prepared quite effectively, they survived the bombardment. And when the British soldiers came up over the top and started to attack the Germans were able to fire back straight away. The British soldiers had all their equipment and pack on them, 60 kilos to carry, so they were ordered not to run. They were ordered to walk. And yet they still, even when the Germans started to fire at them, they continued to walk. Their officers threatened to shoot them if they ran. So they walked to their deaths. And in the documentary, they show commentary from some of the German machine gunners said, if they had only ran, we would have been overrun. But they just walked, and they were able to inflict a lot of casualties. How often do we test the effectiveness of our own tools that we use to defend our networks? How often do we test our antivirus software, our firewalls, our SIMs? How do we make sure that they're working? Because in the British, the 8 days before they launched the attack, they fired over they'd 1,600 cannons and guns fired for 8 days continuously at the German lines. 30% of the shells failed. So even how, the plan was to have this many bombs drop on top of the Germans, but only 70% got through. So how often do we test our tools to make sure they work? How often do we just deploy something and wait for it to do what it's supposed to do and not check and see how effective it is? I think that's a key lesson that we need to make sure. We also need to make sure we create effective defensive lines, and that's what the Germans done. They developed this thing. Now my German, I don't know any German, so I'm going to make a complete mess out of this pronunciation. So if there's any Germans in the audience, please correct me. So, Verteidigung in der Tiefe. Is that okay? Yeah. So I can't improve it anyway. So it's defense in depth, and I know we hear this ourselves all the time. It's layered security. But based on the information, the intel that the Germans got, they reinforced a lot of their trenches. So they put concrete bunkers in place. They reinforced the walls. So this is why when the bombardment happened, not just did the 30% of the shells failed, but it wasn't mud and earth they were bombing, it was concrete and bricks, etc., which made it much more resilient to attack. And how well do we know and understand our own networks? We are the home team. If we're playing a football match, the home team has an advantage because you know the pitch, you know where all the hills and bumps and everything else are in the pitch. And I often see from clients of ours that people don't understand their own network. They don't know what unusual network traffic looks like. And like last night at dinner, we talked about this. If your network performs in a certain way, day by day, anything outside that normal should be a reason for you to worry and understand what's going on. An attacker also has to learn your network before they get to where they need to get to it. So you have an advantage, and we should use an advantage. And similarly, German military used that advantage of understanding the terrain that they were defending against the British in the Battle of the Somme. The Germans withdrew away from the trenches in certain parts of the battle and fought from woods. So they stayed in the trees and they fought from the woods. The British troops had no training in how to fight in woods. So straight away, there was this distinct disadvantage. And the Germans understood where all the hollows and everything else, and they took a lot of advantage out of that. And we need to understand our own networks and know where we can take advantage, create choke points for where the attackers go, create honeypots, or anything else that we can attract and bring the attackers to our notice, and that we can react to them as well. I think what we do fail is we do also look and just focus on the perimeter all the time. We look at defending our network. We look at defending our perimeter. It's the firewalls and everything else that we look to defend. But we forget that it's the devices are not really important to us. It's the data and it's the information on those devices that we need to understand and to protect. And this is what the Germans done as well, in that they took advantage and realized that the accuracy of the British gunners was very good. They were able to zero in on the trenches and launch attacks and shell the trenches very accurately. But the Germans understood that. And what they used to do every time a bombardment would start, they'd evacuate the trenches and use the foxholes to hide in the foxholes. And when the bombardment would finish, they come out of the foxholes and jump back into the trenches again. And then the poor British troops would start advancing, thinking, great, those trenches have been blown to bits, suddenly to be faced by a very strong corps of German soldiers to take care of them again. And another way that Germans used the trenches are the foxholes and adapted. So, what they'd done here was they moved away from defending the perimeter and defended the ground. They defended what was important to them. So again, to my point, we need to defend the data and not the perimeter. But they used to camouflage themselves in these foxholes so that the British forces using airplanes to bomb or to spot where the troops were wouldn't be able to see them because they'd be in the foxholes, cover themselves with a ground sheet, and they were hidden from view. They used the terrain to their advantage. They also, one other thing we need to do and think about is creating specialized teams and capabilities. And if you take like John's talk earlier on about exploit kits and doing reverse engineering of malware, how many of us have those capabilities in-house? Yeah, our access to those capabilities. How many of us have people who are specialized in how to be able to tackle certain threats or to analyze certain threats? And again, the Germans had that as well in this battle. They used specialized teams to attack certain parts of the British soldiers as they came through. Too often I see in companies that the incident response team just focus on one. They don't have a lot of different skills. They're too broad. They don't have any specialized skills. So what we need is specialized skills or availability to specialized skills and tools so that we can better defend. Communicate clearly and regularly. The German military command structure done that quite effectively. They made sure that all their officers knew what was going on, what the strategy was, and where to go. Unlike on the British side, the communications wasn't as clear. The orders came, it was a different structure into two armies and a different culture in how they were managed. You can see this is a German troop. This is when I was looking for researching this talk and looking for pictures to support some of the points. I thought there was anyone to guess what this is? Pardon? No. It's actually for listening for oncoming airplanes. So it's the first version of radar, if you like. The poor guy, sitting there. But, again, we need to be able to communicate our plans to the business and to our teams in a clear way. How do we look to defend our networks? How do we look to defend our business? Do we even understand our business? How many people here have read the business plan of the companies they're working in? So not many. So if you don't understand the business, how do you understand what the threats, the risks that are going to face that business? If your business is going to expand, maybe take over other companies or move into new markets, that brings certain threats and risks. Or if it's going to contract, if there's going to be layoffs, or they're going to make people redundant, that gives a different set of threats and risks as well. Or even if they're going to stay the same size, but maybe move into online transactions or use different technology in different ways. We need to understand what the business is doing so that we can develop plans and communicate back to the business clearly as well what we want to do. This lack of communication that we have between ourselves as security professionals and the business, to me, is one of the biggest barriers we have in being able to successfully defend our networks. Because the business doesn't understand what we're trying to do, and we don't understand what the business wants to do. So therefore, we have this disconnect. And when we go looking for budgets or we go looking for resources, we're not getting the support from the business because they don't see the value in what we're trying to do. So being able to communicate clearly and get that message across is a key thing that we need to do. We also need to be flexible and adaptable. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find any World War I pictures of soldiers doing yoga, but again, we can't be too rigid. If we have, this is how we do our job, or this is how we do things, and this is the way it's always going to be done, how can we respond to new threats, new attacks, new techniques that the attackers are using? We need to be able to adapt and work in a flexible way against these. And I think a prime example of this has been how consumer technology has taken over enterprise technology. 10, 15 years ago, the only way you could have an email on a mobile phone was with a BlackBerry. Very few companies would allow you to even access email from your mobile phone, and if you did, it was via BlackBerry. Then these things called iPhones came along, and suddenly the whole thing's revolutionized. Everybody now has company email on smartphones. There's a lot of talk about the Internet of Things, and have we even thought about how that's going to impact our enterprise security? How are we going to adapt to that? We done a security test of a client in Dublin, and we discovered this device that was sending out wireless signals. It turned out it was a light bulb, and it was connected into the company's wireless network. The IT people knew nothing about these Internet of Things devices being connected into their wireless network, because that was being looked after by the facilities management team, the electrical guys. They plugged all, and we've seen similar cases where companies have installed IP-based CCTV cameras, and the IT security team know nothing about these things. So we need to be adaptable, and we need to be able to be ahead of the curve and be able to respond to these threats whenever they come in. And there's always have to be prepared for the unknown. Battle of the Somme was one of the first battles where the British Army used and introduced tanks. Now, they weren't very effective. They came at 4 kilometers per hour, and you can see some of them were able to be captured. That's the German Army after capturing a British tank. But it was a new way of attack. And likewise, the British Air Force, up until then, had been used just to take photographs or to reconnaissance around the German lines. They now started to use them to drop bombs down on top of the German troops. So the attacks change, and this comes back to the point I made earlier on. We need to be able to react to new threats and new attacks in a quickly and flexible manner. We need a proactive defense. I think a lot of what I've seen a lot of companies is the defense is very reactive. We put our firewalls in place, we put our antivirus software in place, we monitor our logs, and we sit back and we wait for a breach to happen. We wait for the notifications to come in, we wait for the alerts to trigger to tell us that we've had a security breach. We don't actively go out and look and examine and see, have we had a security breach? And a classic example of that is the Yahoo 500 million user account breach just a few weeks ago. The Yahoo security team were actually responding to reports that 200 million accounts had been stolen in August of this year. And while investigating that claim, they then discovered the half a billion accounts that had been stolen from 2014. So if they never went to look for the 200 million accounts that they found about from this year, that other breach would probably have gone undiscovered for a much longer time as well. So if we're not going out looking for those attacks, and again, in the Battle of the Somme, the Germans deployed specialist teams that went out and actually looked into no man's land to see what was coming through from the British side, so that they could change their defenses and react accordingly. So I do think we need to, the days where we could sit back and like run the cert, I would say that 99.99% of all incidents we deal with, when we contact the victim, they knew nothing about it. We were the first ones to know about it, and they had no idea they had any security breach at all. So, you know, we're kind of giving the bad guys an unfair advantage by allowing them to play around in our systems and our networks without detecting them and without reacting to them and without shutting them down. I think this is an important one, something that we probably don't do well ourselves as a discipline or as an industry. We need to critically analyze and review our own performance. So in the British Army during these battles, as I said earlier on, the plan had been the battle would only last a few days. But as reports came back in of more mounting casualties and the goals not being reached and objectives not being reached and the battle dragging on, the reports from officers were very much defensive of their own position. You know, nothing was my fault. It's the fault of faulty ammunition. We're getting there. Or they would create reports to make things sound better than they actually were. You know, we've changed into a drawn-out campaign or a campaign of endurance to wear down the enemy. Whereas the Germans had this, and here goes my German again, Erfahrungen. No, not so good now. But it was, I believe it's translated into experiences, where every officer in the chain of command was dictated to and obliged to be self-critical and to criticize senior officers and their own army. So lots of the German reports were identifying exactly where the problems were and how they were dealing with the attacks from the British. They're identifying poor chains of command, they're identifying that troops hadn't been properly equipped, identifying that their own German gunners were shelling the wrong places. So all criticism that was taken back, adopted, and improved upon. We need to be able to do that ourselves. Every incident we have, every issue we have, we should self-analyze it in a very critical way and be prepared to call out where there are major issues. You know, and a classic example is that nowadays every security breach seems to become with the phrase, it was nation state sponsored. It was a sophisticated attack. Now, if a 15-year-old kid mother is getting social welfare from the government, that to me is about as much we can stretch that most breaches are nation state sponsored. You know, or most attacks, in my experience, are not that sophisticated. They are old patches that haven't been, they're old bugs that haven't been patched properly. SQL injection on websites, you know, it's the #1 way the criminals are getting in. Phishing users and getting their passwords. Password reuse, simple, easy to guess passwords. The DDoS, you know, default username passwords on these Internet of Things CCTV cameras. You know, so if we're not being self-critical and not being honest, well then we're on a losing front here. We know we need to identify where these problems are. We need to look at better ways to fix them and not just latch on to excuses and hope that the problem will go away. So World War I had the Battle of the Somme 100 years ago, one of the most bloodiest battles ever. It was the war to end all wars, allegedly so, but unfortunately, as we all know, we still have wars. I do think we're never going to have an end to our roles. There is no war to end wars for us. We're constantly going to be defending our networks. We're always going to be looking to prevent crime and attackers against our systems. It's the nature of the beast. Crime doesn't go away. So we'll always have to fight our battles. But I think we need to learn lessons from other battles, learn lessons from history, learn lessons from other security breaches, and adopt them to our own environment so that we can be better prepared and better defend our systems. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking my little walk down history and trying to learn stuff from 100 years ago, which, as I said, was an important year in Irish history. And hopefully you found some of the information and the insights of use. If there's any questions, I'm quite happy to take them. And please don't ask me to pronounce anything in German again.